So let's turn over to Genesis 45, 46, and 47. So Genesis 45, 46, and 47. Write that up. So before we start, any particular questions from anybody on those three chapters? No, I don't need it. I know it's getting near the end, so you're getting a little tired. I know I'm definitely tired. And you just got to persevere a little bit longer. It's just amazing the amount of teachings and wisdom God has in any part of His Word. So did anybody notice anything that you thought was unusual or strange when you were reading those three chapters? Maybe they'll come to you here. Okay, so in chapter 45, let's talk about the first few verses here. In verse 1 it says, "Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, 'Have everyone go out from me.' So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard of it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?' But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, 'Please come closer to me.' And they came closer, and he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into slavery. Now, do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God, and He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over the land of Egypt. Hurry and go say to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth which is speaking to you. Now you must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and you must hurry and bring my father down here.' Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept on them, and afterward his brothers talked with him." Okay, so what jumps out at you in that little section right there? Oh, yes, sir? Okay, so Wade is talking about that he's not sure how much of the plan Joseph knew, but he wasn't definitely holding a grudge. Hand back here? Yes, go ahead. So let me ask you a question. It would have been easy for Moses to have wrote, and God sent Joseph down there to do this. But you don't have that. You have one character telling another character, this is what God has done. And so when you have something like that happen, you have some ambiguity, you have some tension. Because it could very well be that Joseph is 100% correct, that God did do this. It could very well be that Joseph is not correct, this is just his interpretation of the events. So the question I want to ask is, why didn't God make it clear? If he really did do this, why did he just have Moses say that? Or why don't we have a dream where God said this to Joseph? Or why doesn't Joseph say, well, God said in a dream like he had done other things? Why leave it with this ambiguity? Roddy? Say that again?
Are we going to give God glory and honor no matter what happens to us?
Okay, so that's why we have the open to interpretation. See if we're going to give God some glory, all right?
I think he really wants to bring them together as a family. They haven't had that their whole existence. And this is the first time they're going to really be a family together.
Okay, so they're going to be a family together. Anybody else? It is interesting in the Bible that a number of things are really spelled out and made clear. This is how God operates. But a lot of things are not made clear at all. And this is one of those. So we have the word providence. We don't use it much anymore. It was something that everybody used a couple centuries ago because everybody believed in a creator and believed that God worked in the world in some form or fashion. So when God intervenes into the world in a direct way and, from our point of view, violates whatever laws he has, we call that a miracle, and he's operating that way. But when God intervenes into his world and doesn't violate any of his laws he's put down, like the law of gravity or the law of death or whatnot, we call that providence because we don't see God working the same way when God caused somebody who was dead to live again. In the life of Joseph, we can look at him and see God's hand in all kinds of things. But does that mean, if we say that God is doing this, when Joseph says that God did this, does that mean that God did evil? Okay, so Roddy says no. How do we explain that? We have Joseph, and his brothers are going to kill him, sell him into slavery, and Joseph's saying, yes, you guys are doing this, but God meant it for good. Go ahead.
God is what good is.
Okay.
The faithful acts of men, the good acts of men, come from God. When men are doing things that fit with his pattern of teaching, that fit with his plan, God is what good is. And so part of what I see when he says, say, let the God sent me ahead of you, there is the unknown about where God intervenes in our lives, but there's also the known in that if we act faithfully according to his teachings and his will, then his will is going to get done. It's sort of a circular law.
Okay. So I want you to think about this for a second here. The brothers sinned against Joseph. They wanted to kill him. That's what they were going to do. Okay? Now, I can make a case that God intervened through providence and encouraged Reuben to say, well, you know, let's just not murder him. Whoops. And then then Reuben's going to come back and get him. I can make a case that God, through Judah, said, let's sell, there we go, into slavery Joseph instead of killing him. One of the things I want you to see is that the brothers were going to do evil, and they were sinning against Joseph. God didn't cause any of that. God didn't encourage any of that. God didn't preordain that. God did not have anything to do with that. What he did instead is he took this terrible sin against his servant here, and he changed it. So it's not going to be murder, and now it's going to be this slavery. He didn't make them sell Joseph into slavery. All he did was make sure they weren't going to kill Joseph, because that would have thwarted God's plan, and God's not going to allow that to happen. So God does speak into people's hearts. You know, you hear people talk about that God talked to me. And we do have some people that think that God talked to me and I hear a voice and whatnot here. But majority of people in the world, when they talk about that, they're meaning that somehow their conscience spoke to them, or that somebody said something that pricked their heart, or they read God's word, or something happened, and all of a sudden they were going to do A, and they flipped around and said, I'm going to do B. That is a lot of what providence is, that God speaks into people's hearts and changes the sin that they're going to do into something different. So I do think that Joseph was correct, that God was working in his life. Now, Joseph is saying that because he has reconciled himself to his brothers and he wants to be reconciled to his brothers. But Moses is recording it for the Israelites to understand that God is active in people's lives even when you don't hear it. Because when in chapter 46, we have God talking to Jacob, and it's going to be 400 years before God talks to anybody, at least recorded, again. So 400 years, God's going to be silent, and the people need to understand that God is going to work in their lives, that God is going to say things, that God is going to do things, God is going to change things because he is in control of his creation, and he hasn't given it up to Satan or to evil forces or to Pharaoh or anybody else. He is going to do things. And just like he can change these terrible things against Joseph from death down to slavery, well, he can do even more than that in our lives. And if God had wanted Joseph to be freed, well, God could have spoke those things and encouraged the brothers to free Joseph. He could have done that. But the brothers still made the choice. Now, in our lives, we want to realize that God works in our lives. You know, we have this spirit. Joseph didn't have this spirit. We have opportunities to hear God's word and his thoughts more clearly than anybody else if we're going to listen. You want to remember that when God talks to me, he talks softly. He doesn't yell at us. He's not the parent that yells at the son. He's just the parent that never loses patience with the child. 10,000 times, pick up your clothes. 10,000 times, can you not sweep this up? 10,000 times, can you not just put your dishes here? Can you not do this thing? He doesn't ever lose patience. He never raises his voice. He just speaks to us softly. One of the reasons why our world is so enamored with entertainment, with music and TV and shows, is because we are always trying to distract ourselves so we do not listen to God. It's hard to hear God when he's talking to you softly when you're busy watching and binge watching all these shows till you just get so tired that you got to sleep, and then you got to get up and go to work. And then as you're going to work and you're at work, then you're on the internet, you're doing this, you're having these conversations, you're talking about all these things so that you could never listen to God. I have no doubt that when Joseph was pleading for his brothers, pleading with the brothers for his life, and that wasn't going well, that he had time to think and listen to God. I have no doubt when he was in Potiphar's household, doing well, he was listening to God. When he was in jail, he was listening to God. He was listening to God all the time because he was doing the right thing all the time. He was listening to God. In our lives, you want to ask yourself, how is it you're distracting yourself? Are we distracting ourselves because we're exercising ourselves to death? Because we're so concerned about our health? Because we're trying to watch all these shows, read this book? What is it that we're doing where we're not giving ourselves silence? Not giving ourselves opportunity just to listen to God? Have you ever listened to your prayers when you're praying to God? So many times it's just nonstop. God, 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 God. God, I got these 26 people that are sick. We can list them all here. And we're just rapid fire here. And then, God, you know, I sinned here and I did this and I did this and this. And we're just going on and we're just talking nonstop. really, for a relationship to work, you've got to be quiet. You've just got to listen to the other side. And that's why God gave us his word. He expects us to read this word and just listen to it. Not to go through it and say, well, in the Hebrew it's this, and this is plural, and this, and that, and all these sort of things here. He just wants us to listen to him, not formulate our next answer and response to him. God working through providence, it's because he talks softly. Now, there's no guarantee we're going to listen to him, like I said. When you look over in Amos chapter 4, you see that God is talking to the people. And he said, I gave you cleanliness of teeth, and I set a famine in the land. Did you guys listen? No. As you guys are starving to death because you have no food, are you listening to me? No. And so judgments come upon the nation because they're refusing to listen to God. How much of our life are we refusing to listen to God? The brothers, they weren't listening to God so much. That's why in chapter 44, Judah's speech is so significant, because he is finally listening to God. He is acknowledging the things they have done wrong, and he is saying, this is how I have changed. This is why we cannot leave Benjamin here. He was a changed person. And it was that speech that broke Joseph. So much so that it says that his servants knew and Pharaoh's household knew that Joseph was weeping so greatly. But even though they changed, they didn't change so much. Did you notice in verses 14 and 15? It says that Joseph fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. So that's the strongest form of emotion that they're going to have, wept on his neck. But with his brothers, Joseph weeps on them, he kisses all of them, and it doesn't say anything about the brothers. His brothers talked with him. No weeping. I don't know if it's just because they're just still in shock, or if they're just really concerned about what's going to happen. I know a lot of times in my life, when I'm sitting and my wife goes to have a conversation with me, in my mind I'm busy thinking, is this a moment? Have I been caught? What's going to happen? And so I'm busy trying to keep myself a certain level here. And I think that a lot with the brothers there. They're like, okay, so Joseph has done this. We didn't read this yet, but you should have read it. In verse 24, it says, Joseph, so he sent his brothers away, and as they departed, he said to them, do not quarrel on the journey. He's not so much talking to them about don't fight amongst yourself. He's trying to tell them don't worry, because they could still be concerned that this is still some elaborate trick by Joseph, because Joseph has already tricked them a number of times, and they thought they were going away and good things were going to happen to them, and then lo and behold, people come along and say, hey, you stole this, you did this, come on back. And in chapter 50, when Jacob dies, that's the very thing the brothers think. After 17 years living in Egypt with their brother, now their father's dead, they think, oh, well, maybe Joseph is going to be mad at us, and he's going to get his revenge on us. So Joseph did reach out to his brothers to try to reconcile, but they could only get so much. Part of that is because they had done terrible things against Joseph, and they were working to change that, but change is a slow thing here. Okay, let's see here. I don't think I want to say anything else about 45. Let's see. Yes, sir.
So, in all your study, why do you think Joseph was able to have such a strong relationship with God when they didn't have the Bible, they didn't have a whole lot to instruction from God to even teach about God? So whereas today we have the whole Bible, Joseph had his dad.
I don't have a good answer for that other than to say genes. I don't know if you've met certain people in your life. Some people are just mean. I mean, they're just mean. And some people are just sweet. I mean, they just bring joy into your life, and they do it with everybody. Some people are just really happy. And it seems to me that Joseph was just a person who just trusted God. I don't know if it was because he had these dreams and God spoke to him later on about interpretation of those dreams. I don't know if it's because he felt the love of his father. I don't know what it was, but God had worked it out so that Joseph was going to be an individual who trusted him. What that should encourage each of us to realize is that God can change our heart and give us more faith to be more trusting. But at the end of the day, we are who we are. So I'm only going to be 5'9". I'm not going to be 6 foot. I'm not going to be 2 meters. I'm not going to be whatever. I'm not going to be blonde. I'm not going to have blue eyes. Now, I can certainly change. My beard could go away. I could lose my hair. And I can definitely shrink. But I'm not going to be more than what I am because it's just who I am. And so much of our life is accepting who we are. I think Joseph just accepted who he was and went with that, whereas the brothers were always unhappy with their lot in life. They always thought they needed more. They always thought they deserved more. They always thought they should have got more or different from their father. And Jacob bears a great deal of responsibility for that, just not all the responsibility. So that's the best I've ever come up with, which isn't that great, but it's the best I got here. In chapter 46, we have the genealogy. So everybody starts to travel. And we have 66 people, 70 people coming along here. So in verses 25 of 46, make that 26. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his direct descendants, not including the wives of Jacob's sons, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. Some of your translations might say 75 because the Greek Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament that Jesus would have had, said 75. A couple things. Genealogies meant something different to ancient societies than they mean to us. We expect our genealogies to be accurate. But when you compare this genealogy with the genealogies given in Numbers and in Chronicles, you do see some differences. And that frustrates us because we think one is lying or one is cheating or one is just wrong, or the guy who did this was stupid and the guy who did this was smart, and we're trying to juggle all these things. And then we throw in the mixture that this is all from God, and we get all the more upset about things here. But what we want to realize is that for them, genealogies mean something different than us. For them, this genealogy was just trying to show that Jacob had all his sons, and they were being blessed, and they brought in all these people here. He says 66 literally came in, and there were 70, all of them here. And how you get 70 is open to debate. If you count Joseph and his 2 sons, you can add Jacob. Or you can add Jacob and Joseph. You can get rid of a couple of sons of Judah that had already died, because those are counted in the list here. You can count God in the list. You can count extra sisters in the list. You can do all kinds of different things here. But God is trying to say that I have been faithful to my promise, and I'm increasing you, become a mighty nation, which we'll start to see by the end of this chapter. That when they come into Egypt, they're going to get this land, and they are blessed, and the Egyptians aren't as blessed. And the Israelites are going to grow into this great nation, so that when we roll into Exodus, we're going to see them be this great nation already. God has taken care of them, and they'll be able to leave on that here. You want to remember that as you're studying the Bible, when you get frustrated with something, sometimes it really is a communication issue because we're Americans in the 21st century and we do our time down to a nanosecond. We do our sizes down to 10,000th of a micrometer, and we do our temperature down to 100 below zero, and we have all these extremes, and we just think that's normal. But the rest of the world, it was never normal, and they're fine with the things like this. Questions? Yes, Sir Elder.
So verse 4, when God says, I'll go down with you,
Yes.
how did that transpire? Are we given any real details on it?
No, that's why some people think the 70th person is God, because he says, I'll go down with you. What I understand from that is that he's telling Jacob, I'm going to be with you. Because Jacob did not want to leave Canaan, because God said, you need to stay here, don't go to Egypt. And now all of a sudden God's saying, yes, go to Egypt. And when you go to Egypt, I will be with you to take care of you. Because part of the problem of going to Egypt is assimilation. That was the problem about living in Canaan was the assimilation that the Israelites are going to become like the Canaanites or the Egyptians. But with God staying with his family, even though Jacob understands he's getting old, he will have confidence that God will keep his children faithful and grow them into that nation, fulfill his covenant promises. Other questions?
Well, and God says this all through the Bible.
Yes, sir. He certainly says it.
He's with him, he's with you, he's with me. And Christ said it. It's a critical theme for the Bible.
That's very true. That's very true here. In chapter 47, we got everybody going to Egypt here. And let's talk about a couple things here. Let's start in verse 7. So chapter 47 and verse 7. And then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many years have you lived? So Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years that my father lived during the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. When Pharaoh sent Joseph to get his brothers, his families, he told them, leave all your stuff here, send all these wagons, just bring the people back down. Well, when Jacob came down, he didn't do that. He made sure to bring all his stuff, all his possessions, all his family, all his children and grandchildren, everybody down. Because part of his concern was that they were going to be assimilated into Egyptian culture. When Jacob looks at Joseph, his son, he sees somebody just like the Pharaoh, not like him. And when Joseph sent all the stuff back, what he sent were all the wealth and the riches and the great things of Egyptian culture, which, as far as Jacob is concerned, is a sinful thing, and it's not anything good. So Jacob is concerned about how his family is going to be. So I want you to see how this meeting is. That Jacob comes in to meet Pharaoh, who is the most powerful person at this time, and the very first thing he does is he blesses Pharaoh. The very last thing he does is blesses Pharaoh. We know from Hebrews that the biblical truth is the greater blesses the lesser. And so Moses is reminding the Israelites, reminding us that Jacob is greater than Pharaoh. And then I want you to notice what Pharaoh's concern is. His concern is the same concern that everybody else has. Time/years. Everybody wants to live longer. Everybody wants to live as long as possible. Everybody wants more time. So when he looks at Jacob and says, well, how old are you? You want to notice that Jacob talks about sojourning. Not, I have lived X number of years. Because this isn't my life. This is just part of my travel. And I've been wandering around here for 130 odd years. So that tells us that Jacob expects more from his life than just this right here, which is what we need to have. We need to have that attitude that we are strangers in a strange land, that we are sojourning here, and that this is not the totality of our life. These are merely bumps and blips in our life as God is changing us. You know, one of the realizations, truths that came to me a few years ago was when Jesus was talking about marriage. And he says that you guys will be like the angels in heaven, neither married nor given in marriage. And while I had known that marriage was a temporary thing, it wasn't until you've been married for a couple decades, you're like, oh, so in the next life, I won't be married to my wife. Because God wanted me to learn something about marriage. God wanted me to learn something about kids. And I'll either have learned it or not, but it's just a temporary stage. And when I get into that next life, I won't need that anymore. When I watch my children, my youngest children play, they still play with little toys, little Legos, tracks. They make their stories. They do interesting things. And they just chatter all the time about inconsequential things as they're trying to grow and mature. And then I look at my two older teenagers, and they're busy, got their face stuck in their screen. They're busy trying to connect with their friends. They're busy trying to play these games, watching movies, to be cool, to learn what it is to be an adult, to get out to the next level. And I see this gulf. And these people went from this, and all of a sudden came here. And I'm reminded what Paul said, that when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became an adult, I put away childish things. And marriage will be one of those things that we put away in the next life. When Jacob talks about sojourning, he wants us to understand that he had to learn some lessons, and we should learn those lessons, but that's not the totality of our life. We are looking for that day when Jesus will come again, and he will be in his glorified body. We will get a glorified body, and we will start learning the things and doing the things God always intended for us to do, and we won't have that struggle with sin anymore. Because again, each of you is old enough and has walked with God for decades, and you get tired of sinning. You just get tired of looking at somebody, and A, you're like, why did I lust? B, why did I think mean thoughts about this person? C, why can't I look at somebody and just want great things for them? Or D, why did I just ignore that person as if they're not of any value? It gets tiring when you observe those things about yourself, and it's so hard to change. And we're able to change it for small minutes, what it seems to be. Small moments in our life, we can do the right thing, and then we let it go, and we forget, and then we do the wrong thing, and we get tired. Which is why Jacob said, you know, my life's been a little hard. 130 years, you know, it's been a little challenging in my life, because he could look back and see all the terrible things he'd done, though all the good things God had done for him. But he was just sojourning. And then, of course, he let Pharaoh know that I'm not anywhere near what my fathers were. They lived even longer than I did, and they had closer relationship with God because they had done different things than I had done. You want to consider your own life and this question that Pharaoh asks about time and years. What is it you want to accomplish? What is it you want to do? I was telling my father earlier, I was reading a man, and his father had died just a couple years ago, and he was reviewing his father's journals. And he was reading in his father's journals where his father had prayed one day, you know, save me from the sins of old men. Because the father, writing in the journals, his wife had died a few years ago, and so he was sad about that. He's sad about being so much older, and he can't get out as well. He's in a lot of pain, and he just wants to sit home and do nothing, or to avoid everything, or to just be depressed or whatever. And he's, in his journals, he's writing, save me from those sins because I can get out and visit somebody. I can encourage somebody. We all have excuses. We all have reasons why it hurts so much to do things. And while we can't do as much as we once could, just like we can't see as well as we once could, that's not the same as saying we're dead and we can't do anything at all. As I've gotten older, I come to appreciate that temptation that older people fall into. Giving excuses saying, well, I just can't do these things. As if that equates to I can't do anything at all, which is not the truth. We need to continue to persevere and not use the excuse, I'm too tired to do these things. Because God wants us to work all the way. You see in the text that Jacob is old enough that he's just stuck in the wagon, and he needs help to stand. He needs help to do these things because he's an old man. But he's still relying on God, trusting in God, doing the things. So he blesses Pharaoh, answers his question, blesses Pharaoh, and then leaves. And then, does anybody recognize what the next story is after Jacob blesses Pharaoh twice? Anybody remember? Audience participation. Okay, so you have this story about the famine and how Joseph is just an awesome guy and how he pretty much conquers all of Egypt. He sells things to people and they give up all their money. And then they give up all their property and their land, and then they give up all their freedom. And so Joseph is such a good manager for Pharaoh that now Pharaoh owns all of Egypt, except for that land that belongs to the priests. Now, you can't help but see in this the setup for Exodus, because Pharaoh now owns everything. He likes having servants/slaves. And so when he sees all the Israelites that are doing these things here, he's like, you know, I should own all these people. I've forgotten about Joseph these centuries later. So I want these people. I want to control them because I need to be greater than my forefathers. You know, when you have a father who's great, that's one of those tendencies sons fall into. They want to be greater than their father. That's why when you're growing up, you just want to be taller than your father. That's your goal. Your fear is that you won't be taller than your mother. So as long as you're taller than your mother, at least I made this much. I didn't make this, but I'm okay here. So you make this. And so Pharaoh after Pharaoh just kept increasing their wealth, increasing their power, which leads to that oppression of the Israelites, and they finally cry out to God. God had told Abraham so long ago that they'll be in Egypt 400 years. And so now we're finally seeing the setup for that. They finally made it down to Egypt. They're going to be there 400 years, and then eventually they'll cry out enough to God, and God will move in their lives and lead them through the Exodus. So this story is here about Joseph and everybody becoming slaves of Pharaoh to one show that Joseph is being a blessing. And I don't want you to misunderstand what's going on here. You know, slavery here wasn't the same as the slavery we think about here. They could still buy themselves out. And Pharaoh only wanted 20% of whatever grain they produced. Typical was anywhere from 30 to 50%, at least as far as the records are concerned. So if you had a really good year, you could buy back your property. You could buy back things. You know, we only wanted somewhat of that. What's going on here is that Jacob is blessing the world, Joseph is blessing the world, and eventually the Messiah will bless the world because God is blessing people here. And God is ensuring that his creation is fed through the act of this very special family, the Israelites. Questions? No questions? No questions? Let me look here. If there's anything else I want to say. we'll look at those last couple verses of 47. So in verse 27 of chapter 47. Now Israel, talking about Jacob, now Israel lived in the land of Egypt in Goshen, and they acquired property, which is in distinction from the Egyptians who lost their property, so God is blessing them. They acquired property in it and were very fruitful and became very numerous. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. I don't know if it's coincidental that Joseph was 17 when he was taken from Jacob, and Jacob gets another 17 years to be with his son, or if there's something else going on, but it is interesting to note that. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Please do not bury me in Egypt. But when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And he said, "I will do as you have said." He said, "Swear to me." So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed. So as Jacob is getting ready to die, he wants to be buried with his fathers because that was the promise. This land will be your land. Egypt is not their land. Egypt is not their home. The promised land is going to be their land, and that's where Jacob wants to go. Even though he spent so many years away from it, running away from God's plan, at the very end of his life, he understands, and he does not want to be an Egyptian. He wants to be an Israelite. And that's how that chapter ends. Any questions? So we got one more week to go. We'll cover the last 3 chapters here, and then the new quarter will start, and I believe we'll be having Matthew will be our class here. So Matthew's a long book, take a couple hours to read. You might start reading it, listen to it, getting yourself ready to talk about Jesus and his teachings. Class dismissed.